Alright, so today we're looking at reflections around the origin, often called about the origin. So, first, some basic simple stuff. A reflection is a turn around a fixed point called the center of rotation. Now, that center of rotation doesn't have to be the origin, but for the most part, what we're going to deal with this year is the origin. Okay, now the figure rotates a specific angle and direction. Alright, and though the figure can rotate around any fixed point, the most common center of rotation is the origin. So that's what I said, and we can rotate, around any point. So we can rotate around the point, 4, 3 if we want, but we're going to stick with the origin, or 0, 0. Okay, now the rules, these are things you're going to have to remember and memorize. Now, a 90-degree counterclockwise rotation, so that means you turn it once to the left, says that if you have XY, you switch the order and you change the sign on what was the Y. So if Y was positive, it becomes negative. If it was negative, it becomes positive. Okay, so an example would be if we had the coordinate 1, 4, that would become -4, 1. Okay. Now, 180-degree rotation, it doesn't matter if it's counterclockwise or clockwise. You change the sign on the X, you change the sign on the Y. Okay? That's all you do. You just change the signs. So, again, if we use the point 1, 4, that becomes -1, -4. And then for 270 degrees counterclockwise, that's 3 turns, so 1, 2, 3. The XY becomes Y -X. So again, we switch the order, but we change the sign on what was the X value. So again, if we're going to stick with 1, 4, we switch the order, so 4, and we change the sign on the 1. Okay. Now, obviously these are already worked out so that we can save some time, but I'm going to go through these. Now, so we have triangle ABC with vertices 2, 7, 6, 5, and 4, 1. So A, B, C, and they're already graphed at the correct points. It says 90 degrees counterclockwise. Well, from up here we know that counterclockwise says switch the X and Y and change the sign on the Y. So change the sign on the Y, it becomes -7, 2. So -7, 2. -5, 6. -5, 6. -1, 4. -1, 4. Now that we have those points, we can graph them. So we go over to -7, up 2, graph the point, label it A prime. -5, 6, go over left 5, up 6, graph the point, label it B prime. -1, up 4, graph the point, label it C prime, connect the dots. Okay, if we look at the second one, it's 180 degrees, and again we've got 2, 6, 6, 5, 5, 1, and 1, 2. So we graph those points, but it's 180 degrees, so 180 degrees was change the sign on both X and Y. So we change the sign on both x and y. So 2, 6 becomes negative 2, 6. 6, 5 becomes negative 6, 5. 5, 1 becomes negative 5, negative 1. And 1, 2 becomes negative 1, negative 2. And then we just, again, graph those points. So negative 2, negative 6. Plot the point, call it P prime. Negative 6, negative 5. Negative 6, negative 5. Call it Q prime. Negative 5, negative 1. Plot the point, call it R prime. Negative 1, negative 2. Negative 1, negative 2. Call it S prime. Connect the dots, and you're done. Okay. Now, 270 degrees counterclockwise. And again, graph the points. 3, 4, 6, 4, 1, 1, and 1, 1, and 8, 1. So with it being 270, let's switch the order and make the x negative. So this becomes 4, negative 3. 4, negative 6. 1 goes first, and then make the 8 negative. So 1, negative 8. 1, negative 1. Graph the points. 4, negative 3. So over 4, down 3. Call it J prime. 4, negative 6. Call it K prime. 1, negative 1. M prime. 1, negative 8. Call it L prime. Connect the dots and you're done. Now for the rest of these, I didn't graph them, but I would suggest you do, especially if you have trouble with the graphing part. I just went through and I found the new points so that you could have that practice. Now, if you want to find them yourself, I suggest pausing and figuring them out before I move on. Yeah, I know this one is already there, but that's up to you. So for this one, it's 180 degrees. So that means change the sign, excuse me, change the sign on both. So changing the sign on both means this would be negative 3, positive 2.
Wait, Matthew,
Negative 6, negative 1. Negative 7, negative 5, positive 7. And now, because you're supposed to graph it, you would have graphed the original and these new points. Now, 270 degrees counterclockwise. Let's switch the order and change the sign on the X. So this would be 5, positive 5. Negative, this would be 7, positive 1. 3, positive 3. 1, positive 7. 90 degrees counterclockwise. So change the sign on the Y and switch the order. So 1, negative 3. 2, 0. Change the sign so it's 8, negative 2. Change the sign so it's 7, negative 5. And then for this next one, 180, so it's again, just change the sign on both. Negative 1, negative 7. Negative 8, negative 5. Negative 4, negative 2. Positive 3, negative 4. 270 counterclockwise, so we change the sign on the X and switch them around. So negative 2, 0. Because 0 is neither positive or negative. Negative 6, negative 7. Negative 8, negative 3. Okay. 90 degrees counterclockwise. So again, we switch the sign on the Y and change the order. So negative 5, negative 7. Negative 7, negative 4. Negative 4, negative 2. Negative 2, negative 5. 180 degrees, so we switch the sign on both. Positive 3, positive 5. Negative 1, positive 1. -3, +3, and +1, +7. $270 counterclockwise, so that's switch the sign on the X and change the order, so 5, -4, -2, -6, -2, -1. 180 is switch the sign on both, but leave the order alone, so +6, -7, +3, -5, +2, 0, because 0 can't be positive or negative, +8, -4. Now, this last one, it's 90 degrees clockwise. Well, clockwise is one turn to the right. Well, one turn to the right is 3 turns to the left. So 90 degrees clockwise is 270 degrees counterclockwise. So we use the counterclockwise rule. And the counterclockwise rule is switch the order and change the sign on the X. So +5, -1, +8, -3, +1, -8. It says 270 degrees clockwise. Well, that's 3 turns to the right, which is 90 degrees counterclockwise, so one turn to the left, so we use the 90 degrees counterclockwise rule. And so that's switch the order and change the sign on the Y. So -2, -7, -6, -5, -8, -1, -4, -3. And that's all there is to this. You have to memorize the rules if you're going to be successful at this.